Before we start this video, let's play a little game of Spot the Difference. I'm not entirely sure if this is going to look any different than the other videos, but I'm gonna give you guys until the end of the video to figure out what the difference is. If this is the first video you're watching from me, go click on one of my other videos, look at it, and come back to this one and see if you can tell what the difference is. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. Today we are going to be doing my May wrap-up and June TBR. I say June TBR, it's just the books that I know that I'm reading in June. I'm not really a big fan of TBRs like so many other people, but I do have 4 books on my TBR. But in the month of May, I happened to read 6 books, which is actually a lot considering I didn't start reading until around the 16th because I had a lot of stuff going on the first 2.5 weeks of May. I had a choir concert, which was our Pops concert, which meant that we were literally rehearsing every day after school the entire week. I also had finals for my history class. I had an AP test for my history class. I had an AP test for my math class. I had a final for my math class. I had an English project. I had an English test. We were reading a book. I had so many things going on. And then I had more finals, and then I had to help other people with finals, and it was just stress. That was what the first 2.5 weeks of my May were. But I did happen to read one book, and that's because we read it in my English class, and that book is Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare. We read the No Fear edition in my English class, and I actually really enjoyed it, despite the fact that I actually don't like reading Shakespeare. I'm just one of those kinds of people. I think that Shakespeare is something that's supposed to be watched rather than read. And I feel like the reason I like this book more than I liked any of the other Shakespeare books is that the theater company at my school happened to put this play on the day that we started reading it, and I went and watched it. So I actually knew it was going on, and that's the only excuse I have for liking this book. But we read it in my English class, and I really enjoyed it, and that's literally the only thing I read for the first 2.5 weeks of May. And then the next book I read was The Diviners by Libba Bray. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars because I absolutely loved this book. I loved everything about this book. I loved the time period it was set in. The 1920s is one of my favorite time periods of any time period, let's be honest. I also loved the idea behind it. I loved that it had mystical elements to it, and then I also kind of loved the fact that it also had a lot of suspense and thriller stuff in it, which is not what I was expecting. I had no idea what I was expecting from this book, but that is not what I was expecting, and it was so good. I'm about to go pick it up and the second one in preparation for the third one that's coming out at the end of the year because I am so excited for it, and I loved the book so much. Like, you guys don't even understand. It basically follows a whole bunch of different people back in the 1920s in New York, and most of these people discover that they have these types of powers, and they're what's called the diviners, and there's been these murders happening, and they have to do with something mystical. It was such a good book. If you haven't read it yet, you need to go read it because it was so good. The next book that I read in the month of May was The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I have a whole book talk on this book, which I will link down below for you guys to go watch. I really enjoyed this book. It was really heartwarming. It follows our character A.J. Fikry, and it has to do with his life, and it was a really cute, heartwarming book. Simple read, and I really, really enjoyed it. The 4th book that I read this month was Starflight by Melissa Landers, and I gave this book a 5+ out of 5 stars because I am literally obsessed with this book. So if you guys don't know what this book is, it basically follows our main character, Salora Brooks, and she lives in a world where if you commit a crime, you get it tattooed on your knuckles. She basically can't get a job because of that, and she needs a job because she was just kicked out of her foster home. And so she decides that she's going to sell herself to servitude to go to the outer realm, which is the fringe, where there's no police enforcement and she can basically be free. And the person who decides to buy her is one of her enemies from school who actually hates her. And they hate each other basically, and he basically tortures her, and then he finds out that she's a felon, tries to kick her off the ship on this outpost, and she would have been stuck there forever. And so basically what she does instead is she kidnaps him for a whole bunch of different reasons, and she buys passage on another ship, and it turns out that everyone on that ship are basically wanted criminals, and they're all in trouble, and it kind of follows their adventures in space, and it was so good, and I loved it so much, and I'm actually in love with this book. I'm about to go buy it. I'm about to go buy the second one. I have too many books I need to buy, and I'm gonna lose so much money, but I don't even care because I loved this book so much. It was so good. It had space pirates, it had romance, it had mushrooms that make you go crazy. It had like a family-like friendship, which was one of my favorite things, seeing that happen. It had fighting. It had Captain Space things. It had more space things. It was so good. It had espionage. It was so good. I don't understand. I love the book so much. You guys need to go read this book because I really, really enjoyed it. This is the last book that I read this month. It was 172 Hours on the Moon by Joanne Harstad. I actually finished this book yesterday, and I decided to give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I was going to give it a 3 out of 5 stars, but for me, my make or break point in a book is the ending. If I don't like the ending of a book, then I'm going to mark it down. If I love the ending of the book, it doesn't matter if I didn't like the rest of the book, I'm gonna mark it up. I did the same thing with Red Queen, and I marked this book up because the ending of this book was so good, and it was so unexpected, and my brain was fried when I finished reading this book. If you guys don't know, this book follows a group of teenagers who win a trip to the moon, and they don't realize that the reason NASA was sending them to the moon is because there's something sinister on the moon, and NASA wanted to eradicate it basically, but they needed some way to get public acceptance to do another trip to the moon, and so they decided to give it a trip to teenagers, and it just did not end well. These poor teenagers had to deal with some sinister something on the moon. And the reason I originally marked it down is because this book was very technical. I liked that it was technical, but it was also really, really hard to get into for that fact. It went into death and things that it didn't need to go into death in, and it also had romance that was not needed and was not expanded on at all. I just didn't understand the point of that. But I liked the technical aspects, but I also felt like it made it really, really slow in the beginning. For instance, they don't even go up into outer space until like 150, 200 pages into the book, and they're only in outer space for probably around 70 to 100 pages of the book. And so getting into the book, it was really, really slow, but once they were up in outer space, it started to speed up a lot, and it got really, really interesting, and so that's why I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. But other than that, this book was definitely an interesting read. I would go pick it up, but only if you're looking for something more on the technical side, because it did have a lot of like NASA stuff, and it had a lot of, oh, this is how this came about, this is how this came about, this is how this happened and this happened. And of course there were stuff that tied it all together throughout it, but I couldn't get over the beginning of it. But other than that, the book was amazing. The last book that I read this month was Why We Broke Up by Daniel Handler. I actually haven't quite finished this book. I don't think that I'm going to be finishing this book anytime soon. I'm going to take my time with this book because it's okay. I don't really want to give it a reading because obviously I haven't finished reading it yet. I'm going to count that I've read it because I'm almost done with it, but I'm not quite there. If I was to read this book right now, I'd probably give it a 3 out of 5 because there's absolutely nothing special about this book. It's okay. It basically follows Min and Ed's relationship, and so Min and Ed just broke up, and Min has a box full of items that represent their relationship, and she sends it to Ed with a letter, and the letter is basically the story, and it explains each of the items and says, this is why we broke up. And it's really cool. It's a really interesting concept. It's telling you the relationship of how it started, and then it's also telling you how it ended all at the same time. And I really, really like that aspect. I like that it has pictures, I like the idea behind it, but there's nothing really special about it, and I'm not like in love with it. I'm not wanting to read this book more than any other book in the world. I'm not constantly thinking about this book like, oh, I want to read this book. I'm like, oh, I should probably get to that eventually. It's okay. That's my opinion on this book. It's an okay book. It's definitely something that's like a midnight read. Something you read it in the middle of the night just because you kind of want to, or whenever you're kind of in that mood, and I'm not really in that mood, so I haven't really gotten around to finishing this book, but so far it's okay. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah, no, that's all the books that I read this month in May, which it was a lot smaller than I kind of wanted it to be, and I'm very sad about that, but I also kind of had a lot of stuff going on, so it makes a lot of sense. But now on to the books that I am planning on reading in the month of June. I have 4 books that I know that I'm going to be reading this month. I'm not, like I said, I'm not really big on doing TBRs because I never really know what I'm going to be reading. I never really know what I'm picking up at the library. I never really know what I'm going to pick up off my shelves next to read. It just depends on my mood. I'm a mood reader, just like so many other people on BookTube who say that they're not fans of TBRs. But the first book that I have that I'm going to read in the month of June is something that I'm actually currently listening to on audiobook, and I'm sure you guys can guess what that is. But if you haven't, it's Gemina by J. Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I am not very far into this book. I just started listening to the audiobook like 2 days ago. I rented it from my library off of Overdrive, which is a free app that you guys should go check out if you have a local library near you. This is the second book in the Illuminate files. I really enjoyed the first book, and I went and bought the second one. This is the spoilers for the book haul that I'm about to do in a couple of days, but it's a sequel, but it doesn't follow the same characters. It actually follows a space station that was destroyed in the first book, and it follows different characters. So far it's really good, and I'm loving the audiobook. That's definitely one way to get through it. I read it at the same time that I'm doing the audiobook, so I kind of go back and forth between reading and listening to the audiobook. It just depends on what I feel like doing. But I am planning on having this done in a couple of days because I love these books so much. The next 3 books are actually books that I have to finish reading that I got from my library, and the first one is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. This basically follows a girl who decides that she wants to go on a different path in life, and she decides to get into forensics, which I find really interesting because that's the career choice that I want to go into. And it leads her down the path of going after the serial killer Jack the Ripper, and that's literally all I know. I just read a little bit more about it just now, and I'm probably going to start reading this book next because I'm really interested to get to it, and it's not very big, it's pretty small, so yeah. The next one is The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein. It's in the point of view of a dog, and it follows his life and stuff like that, and that's literally all I know about this book, but I'm excited to read it, and I'm probably going to take it to the pool with me when I go, like this weekend or something like that, so yes. And then the last book is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I'm also really excited to get to this book because it surrounds a man who wakes up one day and discovers that his life is not how he remembered it, and it basically follows his adventures through different dimensions and stuff like that from what I know. And that just sounds so interesting to me, and I am for sure going to get to this before I have to return my books in like a week and a half. So yes, I am excited, and that is the only book that I know that I'm going to be reading this month in June, but I'm going to be posting a video tomorrow if you guys want to look forward to that, and it's going to be about books that I am planning to read this summer over the course of the entire summer, so you guys will probably get a good idea of the things that I'm going to start reading in June, and stuff like that. So anyways, I thought I would tell you guys what it is that I did that's differently, if you guys haven't figured it out already, and that is that I dyed my hair. I'm not entirely sure if you can see it, but it's it's orange. It's very orange. But I thought that I would tell you guys because I'm really in love with it, and yeah. But anyways, that's all that I have for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're new here, make sure to stick around, and if you do, I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!